Can you hear me? Chi'n gallu clywed? Ni'n mynd I siarad yn Gymraeg. So just I gyflwyno fe hynna, Ffion Rhys yw enw fi. Fi yw'r curadur sy'n edrych ar ôl ar arddangosfeydd yng nghanolfan y celfyddydau yn Aberystwyth. O'n I just eisiau gweud diolch mawr I Elan Valley Links a'i Richard Powell yn benodol am gofyn I ni I ddod fan hyn I siarad. A hefyd I gofyn I canolfan y celfyddydau yn Aberystwyth I gymryd rhan yn y prosiect breswyl. Mae fe wedi bod o fydd mawr iawn I ni. A fel wedodd Cath o CARAD yn yr araith ffantastig na nath I roi ar dechrau'r dydd pa mor bwysig yw'r celfyddydau yng Nghymru a sut mae fe'n gallu newid bywydau pobl. So yn siarad o ran canolfan celfyddydau, so ni'n ganolfan un o'r ein mwyaf yng Nghymru a so mae'n dangos bod y celfyddydau yn bwysig yn y wlad a ni'n cael rhyw 650,000 o bobl trwy'r drws pob blwyddyn, so mae fe yn bwysig a mae galw amdano fe. So yeah, just diolch I chi am gael ni fel rhan o prosiect chi. A just I ddangos y gwaddol o y gwaith mae Elan Valley Links wedi llwyddo. Mae arddangosfeydd gyda ni yn dod lan gan Alice Briggs, mae hi yn y stafell nawr, sydd yn dangos gwaith sydd wedi cael ei creu gan y preswyliad yma. Catrin Webster, sydd wedi bod yn rhan o'r preswyliad o blaen. Anthony Chaplin, fi ddim yn credu bod e yma heddi, ond mae sioe yn dod lan dyn ni gyda fe. A hefyd Zila Bowles, ni wedi dangos, a Mike Perry hefyd, sydd yma fi'n credu, nath wneud arddangosfa tir môr, a nath hwnna creu gymaint o sgyrsiau fel rhan o'r ganolfan a Ceredigion. So just diolch mawr I chi, a ni'n really edrych mlaen I weithio gyda'r artist nesaf, Gwenu Llwyd.
Diolch, Ffion. So my name is as Rosie was saying, my name is Heike, and I've been involved in that very large interview panel from the outset, and it's been a real privilege to be involved in this residency program, in the selection of this residency program, and the attention that all the artists have brought to these projects. And it's a real joy to be here today, because I'm usually just involved in the very early phases where I just engage with the ideas and the concepts, but very rarely get to see then the outcomes of these residency projects, and it's been a real joy to be party to that. To start off with, maybe just to give you a sense of what we want to achieve this afternoon. So we've been invited to facilitate a discussion, and we would like to start off with the three artists that have shared work this morning. I'm sure there's still a lot of questions and comments and maybe feedback to their work in the room, so we'll be making some space for that, but also hopefully open up the discussion a little bit. We're very aware that there's lots of expertise in the room, different experiences in the room, people who have worked as artists, as art facilitators, as audiences in art in a rural context, and we're hoping that you will take this opportunity also to share some of your experiences, your questions, your statements, so please feel free to contribute. You're welcome to speak either in English or Welsh, in a Gymraeg, so just be mindful of the translation. And also when you speak or ask a question, make a statement, it would be really wonderful if you could briefly introduce yourselves so that we know from what perspective you are speaking from, and what capacity you are joining us here today. The organizers have set this day under the theme of arts in a rural context, and there's so many themes that are kind of resonating with that. The question of what do we mean when we speak of rural context, what really is the rural, and what we've seen already in some of the work that has been shared here today, but also the residency project more widely, is that a lot of artists have explored how this place might seem remote, but is of course involved and imbricated in all sorts of different networks. very materially so, the connections between here and Birmingham, which in the last year have really come to the fore through the MAC residency project, the idea of the connections that the water forges, but also other connections that artists have explored, like the inclusion of this place in kind of wider communication networks, or the systems of weather and so on that connect us and connect places, even though they may seem remote. On the other hand, Kath powerfully reminded us this morning that there are very specific kind of issues and that do play a major role in places such as this, which are specific also to a rural context and the lack of access or opportunities that impact on these communities. So we might want to talk about really what do we mean by rural, and what is the role and the sort of the position of the rural. Another question is really arts in a rural context. What do we mean by arts? We have seen already a really broad spectrum of different kinds of art practices, and that has been one of the joys of this residency program, is that there have been so many different approaches that artists have brought to bear on these residencies. But artists are also increasingly sort of less working in the way in which we traditionally think of artists' work, but they're working as communicators, as archaeologists, as archivists, as geographers, and there have been lots of collaborations also with the practices of other people, whether that be people who work the land, or people who work as archivists in the area, or as historians, or as geologists, and so on. So also maybe the question of what is artists' specific role in this conversation of all these different kinds of practices that are engaged with this place, Elan, all the different people who have a connection to this, and what is the artist's specific role in this. And then the third theme that we might want to explore this afternoon is this little word "in." What does it mean to be making work in a place? What does it mean to be in a place and working in and from a place? And what does it mean to be making work here and then take it elsewhere? How does the work that has been taken elsewhere outside of Elan then reflect back onto Elan? What does it say about Elan? How does it introduce people to Elan? And what then is the impact of that work back onto Elan, and how Elan sees itself? So arts in a rural context is opening up all these different kinds of thematics and themes. But to start off with, an opportunity to invite our three artists to kind of explore a little bit more the work that they've shared with us today, and also an invitation to you all to share any questions that you have for the artists. I'd like to start off, what really struck me in the last moment when Marcelo invited the two of you to play together is that the residency program has functioned as an individual. There have been individual residencies, and artists have worked, of course, in connection with communities and other people, but have worked by themselves throughout. But there has now, over the 6 years, really been a sense of a sort of a critical mass of artists who've worked here, 14 artists altogether. And that how, is there a sense of a sort of community of artists sort of growing that have had this experience, or what is the connection between the artists that have done this residency project, or what is your hope might emerge from all of those of you who have been involved in this experience? And maybe this would be a moment, Ffion already mentioned a few other artists in the room. Could we maybe see a show of hands, how many of you here have been part of the residency program? I see Zilla there, and Daniel, and so there's a really substantive group of people who have shared this experience.
I think actually it's the event today, and this building up to this has just led us all to kind of start interacting properly. Actually, certainly when I was doing the residency, there were other artists also doing residencies sort of simultaneously, but they were kind of like the ghosts who would kind of come in and out of the house when I wasn't there, and then I would be their ghost, I'm assuming. And you know, you'd see little traces like, you know, something left in the kitchen or, you know, these kind of things. But actually, this event has been really great because I think, like you said, it is, although you do work with people, it's a very individual experience. The residency is very much pointed on the individual. But you have this shared experience that you didn't realise, and the conversations we've been having kind of all day and yesterday as well has been, you know, a lot of reminiscing and sharing stories, but actually we have a very common experience as part of the residency. So it's really great to have an event like today where we can actually sort of hopefully build on those connections. That's my feeling.
Yeah, I mean, it's a great opportunity to meet each other and also to see the other works that have been happening, because it's such a diversity, and I was fascinated like this morning looking around at some of the work, and so that's really good to have had this event also to share that, to show it. Yeah. And the event is not finished, so we have time to even chat more, and I think that's really important to, yeah, that we had this opportunity to meet face to face, like you were saying, that conversations. There are some common elements actually, yeah, about, I think one of them, I think was it last night, about being alone, isn't it? One of them is that the isolation aspect. I'm not answering your question right now, but it's just getting a bit. And that is like so important in this residency. I think it's quite unique as well, just being off-grid. So that's what we were saying yesterday, isn't it? Talking about being off-grid, no, you know, just a cracky landline, and that was it. And just working with the elements, having to make a fire, to get hot water, and that sounds very basic and kind of like, but it's part of the setup, and it makes you think in a different way, because you have to deal with this before you even start making work or even thinking about work. And I think that for me was, and for some of us who we spoke yesterday with, that was also a common feeling that, yeah, not all of us think that probably, but certainly for myself and some others, it shifted our way of approaching some of the explorations. Yeah.
Thanks. I was just, it was really nice to see all the hands go up of the artists that are connected to it. It's quite impressive, actually. Just responding to what everyone just said, it is really important that that opportunity was made, as you know, when you apply to, you know, be alone in this cottage where it's, especially in the colder period of time, you spent a lot of time maintaining the space. But it's really good thinking time. And so it does offer that. But potentially the flip side of that is maybe a weakness, is that there isn't actually collective learning. This event is fantastic. There was an exhibition that I was part of, but actually, again, it wasn't quite as maybe didactic or dialectic anyway. So one thing that I don't know if any of the other artists are thinking about, but it hadn't really occurred to me, is what is the collective learning and how could that be extracted? You know, what we each maybe feed back at the end, but what is it that we might say together, and how that might inform other iterations or ways of working, which seems like an interesting maybe provocation or proposal.
That's a terrific point, actually. Are there any other artists in the room who've been on the residency program who have some thoughts on this? Yes.
Yeah, well, I think that...
Could you just introduce yourself very briefly?
I'm Daniel Crawshaw, so I was in residence back in 2019, which does seem like quite a long time ago now. But yeah, it's great to see everyone here today. And I think my feeling is that, with the residencies, there was sometimes going to be sort of crossover was going to happen, or relationships were going to happen, and of course there was going to be that ghosting of the other artists. So it's really nice to be here together. And I think Marcelo's just made a very good point about how, what are we collectively? As I say, I think we're just at the beginning of sort of getting to know each other's work and knowing what we've all done, seeing each other.
Alice and Kath?
Yeah, I've really enjoyed hearing different perspectives. I was here last year ghosting with Gareth, and so yeah, first time we've seen each other. Yeah. It's quite funny. And I guess I'm enjoying hearing the different perspectives. I didn't realise how much I was coming from my own place until you hear from all of the other artists and all of these other ways of looking at it. Particularly, I think it struck me particularly with you, Marcelo, because and with going with the poetry up the valleys, and I really enjoyed it, but I was distinctly like, oh, I completely, my perspective is so different. I was really like arguing with myself whilst listening to you and trying to focus on the poetry of it whilst arguing with myself from my own perspective, which was quite funny. And I'm not sure if I'm unique in this, but I know the valley really well, and so my perspective was coming at it from a very personal background and a familial background, and wanting to come back and look at childhood memories as well. So that's been interesting, hearing how other people have come at it from completely fresh, not knowing the place at all. And one of the questions on the report was, what were your first impressions? And I can remember my first impression. In fact, I was trying to remember it as I was exploring during the residency. So it's nice to hear what other people's first impressions are, because mine are so different.
Kath, you raised your hand. Did you want to?
Yeah, I do. It's when artists first came here, they came quite often. I'm going to use artists generically, I apologise, but they often came here with a really clear idea of what they were going to do, which evaporated the second they were on their own. And for some people, that was a really, really scary space to be. And there were some people whose emotional health went really wobbly really quickly. And I myself and Peter Cox spent many hours kind of holding a space, mentoring, and in some cases holding hands with people and acting as a sounding board to enable that change to happen. So I would say that in any place where this is replicated, having that kind of external voice and external view, which is here, is really valuable. That's what I found. And the other thing is that some people came with really bizarre ideas about the area, and they were just simply factually incorrect. So they weren't interpretative things, which were interesting. They were actually just factually inaccurate, and it was a good job that we picked those up, because they would have been really almost insulting sometimes. So for those two kind of different reasons, having that ability to mediate people stepping down from their very busy creative lives into a period of stillness and birth back out into the world, I would say was quite important if this is to be replicated, wherever it's replicated.
Thank you very much. I mean, talking, it's interesting when you said the artists were working here individually and in solitude, as it were, but you, Kath, or your colleagues from CARAD, you were the sort of continuous kind of through line through all of these residencies. So you saw them, you saw them all kind of, so you are like the link that kind of holds you, Richard and Simon, the link that held this all together. Taking this forward, and then we might want to come to another point, but do you have any suggestions if that is to be enacted going forward? The sense that there's a community that has been created and is sort of a wealth of knowledge that has been created through these residencies. How can one keep hold of that knowledge going forward? How can one nurture that? Does anybody have any suggestions of how that might be enacted, apart from holding, of course, events like this where everybody gets together?
I think there's already an idea in cooking up to have it online, to have all the work somehow and the artists in one space, so people can go and learn and inquiry and find out what happened. And perhaps that way also we can have each other's, we can contact each other if we wanted to have more, more information. I think that would be a good way, because we are from different parts of the world as well, not just from the UK or based in the UK. That's just a practical answer, really, a suggestion.
Yes, there's a contribution at the back, and then Simon, and then... Could you briefly say who you are?
I'm Tony. I'm here as part of the technical team. It just occurred to me that when people said they were in the house and gone, and they felt like there were ghosts there, if there was a visitor's book, perhaps, in the residency, where people could write a few things, they might encourage a kind of continuity between the artists.
I think that's a lovely idea, almost like leaving a message for those who come after you, like kind of a passing on, and being aware of those people who were there before you. Yeah, it's a lovely idea.
We did communicate.
Yes. Yeah, I think Elan Links put us in touch. That's right, Richard. And you had questions about the house, and because things were up and down at the time with the generator, I think, and there were various things that I was like, okay, yeah, that was all right. But I just remember, yeah, we had a phone conversation as well, and actually that was really nice. So even though we didn't only met yesterday, we have spoken and sort of shared information.
Yeah, it was nice to have his perspective about the space, the landscape, the environment before I arrived. But I initially contacted him for practical information about the house.
How to get there without a car, I think.
Yeah, that was the main thing, because you don't want to go with a car there. So.
Simon, you had to.
Phone calls are good.
I'm Simon. I was at Elan in 2015.
You were part of the pilot, sort of that initial set of residency. Yeah.
Yeah. But actually, what Gareth said, I wonder if there's a kind of form of collectivization of traces that's possible, a little bit like you were suggesting in terms of kind of passing on messages, leaving traces for each other. I know during 2014-15 we did leave traces for each other. There was a book, practical things like how to light the Raven, how to keep it in, the warmest part of the house. I think I bought a hot water bottle and left it. Other people, there were books and maps. So there was there was a kind of collective, kind of, ghostly kind of learning together, I think.
I lost 2 ordnance survey maps.
It felt
donated.
It felt like the house was lived in as well when I arrived. I think, I don't know, you arrived and there was like things like maybe like olive oil or like the maps or some candles and like you say some, and some instructions and things like. A bit of it was there, and it's
kind of ghostly and material traces and accumulations that could happen.
Wood.
I mean, when I was there, one thought I had was that the house is a kind of amazing place to stay. It's kind of quite a privilege to stay there because it is quite basic in a way, and it brings you into a kind of very physical relationship with living there. One thought I had, because it was early on, was that we should have a kind of work day. Bring all the artists together to kind of work on the house, do some painting, chop some words,
Yw'r Cymru.
Yeah, exactly. And I wonder whether there's something in the collectivization of working together that engenders the possibility to kind of talk about what we did, what our responses are, how we felt when we were here. So, yeah, maybe that's something that can still run. I'm not sure what's happening with Heike at the moment.
There's Richard raised his hand.
My name's Richard Powell. I was one of the co-runners and directors of project managers. Touching on Alice's point of memory and ownership, and in a way she's talking about she owns her own ideas and her own memories in place, and then that place is the landscape, and each of you have all encountered an ownership of that landscape through your own cultural lens. And that interests me because in some ways Alice has sort of illuminated something that your ownership is different, and how the land is owned and how it's possessed by people, and how you're allowed access into that, and you're allowed the generosity of the artist is to allow access into their notion of the land. And I think that's an interesting, for me that was one of the driving motivators for inviting you, to find out how you saw it. Yeah? And so it's not a singularity, it's a multiplicity, and revealing that multiplicity.
Yeah, I think as Alice said as well, it is, as an artist, it's really fascinating to see everybody else's interpretations, because they're just things that I wouldn't have thought of. And I think you do get so into your own interpretation of what you're doing and why you're there. And, even just the small snippets we've seen today have been just kind of so illuminating, and, so I'm really curious to see everybody else's work now, so that's maybe something that we can also try to do, is to help us to find, the website's a great idea, but I wonder if there's another way as well where we can kind of share each other's work and open up a bit more of a dialogue between us, and also figure out how we can be used by more, further by CARAD, by the Arts Council, by Elan Links, to actually use this, tap this amazing sort of, little pool of people we've got here to kind of take things on.
Anthony was raised his hand in the London.
Yeah, thanks. Anthony Lyons, resident artist in 2020, and continuing on to 2021 for disruptive reasons when there was a lot of interruption with access in 2020. Anyway, I just want to share a little tiny anecdote which may or may not be relevant. It's about accidental dialogue or interaction, serendipity in a way. Is Kate here? Kate Green? She was.
I think she's going to walk a dog.
Oh yeah, all right. She may or may not even know about this, but I was wandering above the cottage in some kind of after a storm, and I spotted scattered in a little patch of the hillside some objects, some tiny little objects. I think a tiny miniature doll or some paper, and I was attracted towards it. And then I realized what I'd uncovered was a letterbox. And I don't know if people are familiar with the tradition of letterboxing, which dates back a long time in Dartmoor, where it started. It's now replaced by geocaching kind of thing. But the tradition of letterboxing was to leave a box in the landscape, and the finder would write in the notebook that when they'd come, what they found, but also take an object and leave an object. So there's an exchange there. But anyway, this was all scattered around. So I replaced it all in a new Tupperware box, which I'd found or brought from the cottage. Came back. But anyway, what I found in the notebook, luckily in a plastic bag, was a lot of writing, or long writing of Kate's, because she'd obviously found it and she was describing what she was doing, who she was, and then I added to it, put it back in. I haven't been back, but maybe somebody has been back and found it. But it just maybe gives me the idea that even in the cottage, something like that could be interesting, because there's a physical exchange, an exchange of thinking as well, writing possible, but it's just a small kind of happening that occurred.
I think that responds to, in a poetic way, to a lot of things that were just said around what remains as the contribution outside of the work, and how is it collectively held. And a piece of work that maybe would be useful around framing the learning, which is how do you collate collective reflection as a type of evaluation, potentially a publication. I think I had the 2015 publication. There was a publication of the artist residency, wasn't there? And again, that could link across to whether or not it's digital and it's on a website, because it doesn't have to be like a bunch of posts of different artists, because then actually that continues to silo everyone, which is great, because that would be nice, and I would definitely love that. But it doesn't necessarily replace the collective learning, which there's an aspect that kind of sits on, but that can also be a document or some kind of way of maybe digitally or publishing, collecting it. And I guess the only other thing I was thinking about in terms of ways that you could just slow down the kind of catching of the coattails of the artists that just left, which is how I think it was for everyone. I was the second artist in residence, so there wasn't much. It was very stark. And I felt like, oh, I wouldn't mind like leaving a drawing up, you know. And I kind of thought, what would it look like if there was the something that was an offering of what the previous artist had done and what that would look like over 8 years' time, without obviously making a mess. And maybe a way to have for kind of in terms of learning would have been just to slow down the passing of the baton, because it was very fast, and sometimes there was a phone call or a meeting, but maybe that crossover could just be ever so slightly slowed down, and that I think a lot could come out of that, as is exemplified by our like jamming session at the end.
Zilla, you had your hand up.
I arrived here today. I couldn't get here until later, and I just want to say, actually, this is not my point, but I just want to say, I feel like there's an incredible spirit of generosity here, and it's inspiring. Generosity from people who have helped us as artists to have this experience, but also all the people who've come to experience today. And I was also thinking about how I got to know Marcelo, which was because he and his partner helped me change a tyre on my car, and that was our bonding moment. And there's something about, I love your practice, because your practice is about generosity and including people. And I'm thinking, there are so many of us in this room, artists who I respect, who work with landscape, and as I continue my practice, I feel such a responsibility in that, like ethically and in terms of, you know, the crisis that we have at the moment in future and everything. And I'm stuck sometimes with that, like so many of us are. And I'm part of another, in Wales, I'm part of another group which meets online that some people here might be part of. It's called Lux Wales, it's like for artists, filmmakers. And we have, and I didn't make this up, it's sort of come from Lux, an organisation in London for moving image. But there's this protocol where people meet online once a month or whenever they can, and sort of have a premise that they share and then discuss, and it can be researched or not researched. And what's incredible about it is that so many, it changes the way I think about that type of work, and I wonder if something like that could happen using your, you know, inspiring ideas around collectiveness with people involved in this. And it doesn't necessarily just have to be artists, but I think, you know, what we're good at is telling people what we think of things, or how we've thought of something, and that it sort of ends up, as you can see here, offering a space for discussion. So yeah, those are my thoughts. And I just have one more thing to say, because I feel like, just because I came in late, but there's been a lot of talk of isolation, but I just want to say that I think my residency was the opposite of isolation. I spent my entire time here completely absorbed in the community, and I owe a lot of that kind of engine of that to Kath and Peter from CARAD, so and also to the team at Ellen Links before, Eileen and Andrea. So just a great thank you from me to those people.
Thank you. Thank you. Chris, and then Ffion is Chris.
Thanks. Chris Fowler, I'm an independent curator. I've worked for many years in the mainstream gallery sector, but probably in the last 12 or so years, I've found that doesn't really provide a kind of socially connected environment in which to work for some kind of socio-political change, and I now spend a lot of my time based in local community, urban as it happens, but I've worked in the valleys and other rural communities. I suppose what I'm interested in is less in the agency, collective agency between artists, which is a wonderful thing. And if at the end of this session, artists who are here feel better about that connectivity, then that's fantastic. I'm more interested in the agency this project has within the wider socio-political and economic sphere. I'm thinking about artist residencies, and I'm reminded of the artist placement group, which some of you will be aware of. You had artists who were actually inserted into institutions that were responsible for major social change. What I think is really important is that we need Welsh Water, we need Arts Council, we need all of these agencies to be involved in this conversation, because at the moment it still feels, again, talking to people who believe in the kind of values that Kath talked so beautifully and passionately about. That unfortunately has little political traction for me, and I've been through this for decades. So for instance, I'm interested in artists who might be in residence with the Farmers Union of Wales, or the NFU, or other agencies which drive land management practices in this country in a very particular way, because a lot of the values that, for instance, Simon mentioned, there was contention around some of the representations of landscaping, particularly I know of one artist who was involved in the pilot project, and throwing up a lot of very interesting and contentious ideas about how land is managed. And I suppose what I think is, if you look at the landscape around us, and you look how it has been managed, and you look at how it could be managed in a very different way, these are the kind of things that are about the future, and they're about how we survive in a climate emergency. And so I suppose in a way I think the potential for this scheme to really ask a lot of those serious questions is here. But at the moment I think the elephant in the room, ruralism and the kind of values which define traditional ruralism continue to circumscribe the kind of possibilities for this project. I would like to see it being much more adventurous. I would like to see it being much more contentious, and I'd like to see it starting to create a debate outside this environment, and one with the political powers that exist in our country. Yeah.
Can I respond to that?
Yes.
I just want to respond to that because I totally agree. Although I think that it's worth contextualizing a few things. That wasn't the position of this. Yes, but that necessarily wasn't the position of this residency. Although I can understand how the framing of what we were just talking about, including the knowledge production of the hive mind of the artist, could inform a future iteration in which those kinds of rural residency is embedded within the human organizations that then impact those residencies, right? And so that's a building upon. I wouldn't necessarily say that's more adventurous, but I would say it's maybe more like human political rather than kind of like the political landscape. Artist placement group, I have a report that I can share with you, anybody else who's interested, because I just did mentoring on a project for Bergen Council in Norway around 2 artists positioned in the council to be able to understand how to work with people better as a council system. And I kind of reported on Artist Placement Group. New York Department of Cultural Affairs did an absolutely mind-blowing artist residency within places like the justice system. I mean, really powerful work. And I think there's examples that are present that can say, okay, this is how we did it within this landscape with these partners. What would it look like if now we built upon that with these models that have been done internationally within Welsh Water in your offices, making those decisions that we're not actually seeing because we're kind of dealing on the impact side of it, not on the decision making.
Yes, there's a...
Okay. Hello, Mark Perry. I was on the first research group of artists, Mark Simon, and I completely agree with Chris. I think there's a massive elephant in the room here. I think I'm probably the artist that you referred to in terms of having questioned the approach I took to my residency, which is when I first came to Elan Valley, I was derived from Aberystwyth, a deep sense of melancholy. My history was science, ecology, I worked with Greenpeace, very well involved with Oxford University Ecological Society, and I am aware that 85% of Wales is rural. Okay. We're right in the centre of that rural here. Of that 85%, only 1.9% of people manage that 85%. But that 85% represents a huge opportunity to tackle climate change, a massive crisis for everyone, and also to tackle biodiversity, massive crisis. But it's very hard for someone like me with an English accent, I'm not English, I'm Irish Scottish, to actually be part of that dialogue. There are many people open, curators, many institutions that welcome and challenging how we look at the landscape, how we interpret the landscape. And is this landscape actually good for biodiversity? Is it good for climate change, sequestering carbon? But I've had so much negative feedback also from the work that I do because I'm challenging that. And so I just find it I think given this is potentially the rural residency in Wales, it feels to me there needs to be a far greater curatorial or whatever it's meant to say, we want to address this key issue. Now I know it's a problem because artists are, there's a very strong farming community here. I have challenged the notion of sheep farming, extensive sheep farming, but strong communities are not based on sheep, they're based on sustainable futures. And today I haven't really heard anything. You mentioned the word crisis, but we're in a crisis. And the work I've been doing up in Scotland, with Scottish rewilding, it's incredible what they're doing. I went into a 1,000 hectare rewilding scheme off the Loch Ness, where the estate was run by one guy and one ranger, the shooting estate. And just citrus spruce wood, but with money, and he had some few shooting parties every year. And a friend of mine, who's ex-head of Greenpeace, Jeremy Leggett, got crowd-funded money to go and buy this estate, to turn it into rewilding, to sequester carbon, and to set up ecologists there. The local community, terrible. It's English coming in, it's the whole clearance again. It was quite violent. Car smashed, all this sort of stuff. But he did it, he got the funding. And now that estate, rather than hiring one person, has 40 people full-time. Ecologists, locals, whatever. The local community is absolutely behind it because they can see jobs for their kids, really good jobs. Academic institutions are behind it, they're setting up an artist residency, and I'm just seeing a place change from a very, very monoculture community that defended itself with fake conservation. They support one bird, as opposed to creating really complex ecosystems and regenerating. The word conservation now is not used by ecologists because what do you want to conserve? One bird? No, we need to regenerate and restore. It should be restorative, not conservation. Conservation is a term used to defend the status quo. Okay? I'm lost in my train of thought.
No, thank you.
I've really enjoyed today because it feels like there's incredible energy here. And I wasn't expecting that, to be honest. Incredible energy, incredibly well organised, and I really love what the artists have done. And so I feel, there is a future, but I just don't believe this elephant's being addressed. And maybe I'm an outlier and cause problems, and that's how it is. But I think there's so much that artists can be involved in that narrative.
Yeah, I agree. Can I say
Yeah,
something?
yeah.
Yeah, it's good. I really like this conversation, how it's getting on, because I think I touched the surface on this here. When I was here in residency, I spoke to some ecologists and a farmer who set up, Saoirse Lewis, she set up a network of farmers to actually work the land in a better way, etc., and other things. But I touched the surface because I spent a month and I was learning as well. But I do a lot of eco-activism, and with Greenpeace I have as well. So I couldn't, and it's really good that we have these suggestions, because why not do that? Or some artists who are interested in being that, but we need more support maybe, and we need more time as well, and more links with maybe other organizations who can help that that to happen. It's not a utopia. I think it's actually realistically possible, but it means preparation. But I think that would be really good. I mean, I am interested in this because I like to make work that is also meaningful and useful, and make the world a better place. I'm sure I'm not the only one wanting to do that. So yeah, I just thank you for saying what you said, and maybe there's some thinking to do that in that direction. Yeah.
This also feels like something, I don't know, I also come from a conservation background. I used to work for the British Trust for Ornithology. One of the first people I met when I came and started the residency was Jim Carter, who works for the RSPB, and they run the nature reserve next to the visitor centre there, and also some of the other sites up on CARAD. And it's really striking the difference in the bits that are fenced off for the RSPB and the bits that do criminally run are very different. And I think you get a sense, we talked about the huge interview panel as well, and as the artist you definitely get a sense of there are a lot of different voices involved in this place, in how the land is run, and they don't really agree. Sometimes they're widely apart, I think, and sometimes they have some areas where they do overlap. But I think in terms of the artist agency, I think a lot of the artists I've spoken to have also been very kind of deeply engaged with ecological issues, with climate crisis. But yeah, I think it's difficult to drive that from an individual perspective, isn't it? And I think it's difficult to know, I think I love the idea of putting an artist residency in the NFU. I think that's a great idea, but would they ever go for it? And I think the big question is, how do you persuade them that it's the thing to do,
Yeah, so Alice and Kath, do you want to respond very directly to this? Yeah.
Because we worked with the Radisher Wildlife Trust last year, and we had an artist residency then. With their Ross Pasture scheme, and they did work with the NFU, and for the first time they got the NFU and the head of the Radisher Wildlife Trust, their CEO, in the same room and talking. The other thing I want to say is you have people here who do that work, who go down and do that work. So there's a lot of emphasis on bringing people in, which is great. As an organisation, we've done that to kind of, in the past to bring best practice. But I would like to say that there are already artists here working, and they're a voice that is very seldom heard, and that we have had to fight for throughout the residency, because for a statutory requirement to be a resident is that you've got a huge long list of accredited exhibitions, and you've had prestigious prizes. Well, for the reason I outlined earlier, we haven't had that in this area. But you have got really good artists here, sitting in this room, who do that work already, who talk to people locally, who talk to landowners, who work with landowners. So I think that's another, that is another thing to consider, is that you can't just bring everything in. You need to bring out from people here and learn from people here as well what they do. And yes, Simon, I could kiss you on the head for what you just said. We do need people embedded in those organisations, but don't neglect what's already happening here.
Yeah, that's a really strong point. Can you see, Kath, having worked on the residency programme, can you see a way in which that could be changed or adjusted to make to give more support to local artists, or to make their work more visible as part of this, or is this a different thing altogether?
It's already happening. The effect of the residency is already making that more. It's bringing back a soil which allows artistic expression and which allows a normality of artistic expression to happen, and people will naturally, because that's what they want to do, talk to those subjects. And yes, I would say have more residencies, have longer residencies, but definitely include local people, local artists, local organisations. If you don't do that, you benefit your practice, hooray. What use are you to this area, which has so much to offer and which hosted you? So you need to interact with this area, these people, to kind of pay back what you've been given as an opportunity.
I think something that is good in terms of legacy is now that Mac Birmingham are on board, we're on board in Aberystwyth, and I think we're talking about the collective of artists and how important it is for you all to speak to each other. I think it's important for us as organisations who support these artists to actually talk to each other as well and find a common aim. How do we frame Elan Valley? Is it about the political? Is it about the artist's personal journey? Do we reframe it in a way in the brief? And I know the artists that have applied for Elan Valley residencies have been those artists that have gone beyond the sublime landscape or the notion of beauty of this landscape. You've managed to get underneath, haven't you? And you've asked these really, really important questions. So, I mean, as you say, Chris, how do we, and Mike, how do we kind of encapsulate that and present it as something that, if we want action, is that what we want? Change.
Yes, we want change.
Yeah. Alice was first, and then I think you at the back, you had also a question.
I think all of the artists here and who've engaged with this residency work in the landscape because they care deeply about the landscape and the ecology of the landscape, and we engage with that in different ways. My work absolutely challenges the idea of the melancholy of the landscape here. And I think it's really important to remember that the Elan Massif is a massive carbon sink. It's holding carbon. And to talk to Iwan and the Elan Valley Trust about the work that they're doing in terms of restoration, absolutely let's engage with and have the debate about what else we can do. But I think it's important not to just lump everything in this landscape into the same context. The point is that the Cambrian Mountains, the Elan context, Mid Wales, is a very unique landscape, as are all landscapes, and we have to treat them differently. We have to look at their unique perspectives. And being artists here it allows us all individually to bring those perspectives and then to share them with our audiences, and we do that in different ways. And perhaps we could talk more, I don't know, some of us work in more radical, kind of activist ways that are more direct, and other artists are much more subtle in the way that they do that. But we all have an impact. That's what we want to make work for. Gareth's work, I think culturally it's really important talking about even just talking about the place names is just so important. And I've looked at the place names as well and the Welsh, and just understanding the geomorphology through the Welsh cultural context, that is really important too. And I don't think anybody is missing that point. And I'm not sure that it's the role of the artist to do that individually. I think that is an organisational perspective. That is about the other people may disagree clearly, but we all come at it with our own perspectives, and we can all make a difference, and perhaps we can discuss how we could more collectively make a difference, or just galvanise that impact perhaps, or just to share that more widely.
There was a question there.
Yeah, I'm Pete Roberts. I'm the education portfolio holder for Paris. Yesterday I was at panel session hosted by Cymryd. On the final part of it, we were talking about the impact of English language and social media on the language of the schoolyard. And it struck me, listening to people today, that same destructive influence of homogenising the arts, homogenising culture, applies in this context. So my question, and perhaps challenge to you, is what engagement have individual artists and the project had with the local schools in terms of helping them to understand that there is more diversity than TikTok and Facebook, and that there is actually value in the landscape and value in their own expression?
I think there are quite a few people. Daniel can answer that.
Yeah, I went into Llanidloes and Bilth, and I did work with kids there, and I sort of introduced my landscape painting, and they were working with the same materials that I use. So I was introduced myself and my approach to the landscape, and then they had the opportunity to work with oil paints and make successful pieces of work in like a 40-minute sort of period. And yeah, I was, again, like what Kath was saying at the beginning, it's really gratifying to know that just, to me, just felt like, well, it was nothing. I just went and did some teaching in the school for a morning, but to know that actually has that actually goes some distance. And I got back in touch with the teacher and told her about this, and was thinking, well, those kids, they're now 5 years older, and they would have taken something of that lesson with them, I think. So that's me.
Yeah, there's a question at the back. Do you still want to ask it?
Yeah, okay. I'll kind of move on a little bit, but I think it's still a really interesting point I want to make about. So my name's Toby Hay, and I'm a musician, and I work at Oriel Davis Gallery in Newtown. And last year I worked for the Radnor Wildlife Trust on the project that Kath was just talking about. And on that project we worked with an artist in residence, Ffion Rhys, and we were quite successful in bringing farming communities and conservation groups together through his work. And that's led on to a project he's actually just opened now down in the Senedd, a new installation piece to do with the curlew, which I worked with him on the soundtrack. And I suppose what I want to say was that journey which began here in this landscape has now ended up probably in the most important place in the land, so to speak. And it's kind of getting to the heart of what we're talking about, where we're reaching the right people. And I think what Kath was saying about this area is massively underfunded and undervalued in the way that it's in terms of the arts. So how can a project like this, through the great success of bringing people in, encourage more art to happen here in between, if you see what I mean? I had the great pleasure of meeting many of the artists who came here and interacting with them, and I already knew Gareth as well from the music scene in Wales, and it's been really great seeing people come in to explore this landscape which I know so well, and to kind of interpret it and share that. But maybe there's a way in these schemes as well of having some of the funding go directly into the community, to local artists and to arts organisations, to run alongside the residency, so it isn't just a case of bringing people in and then them leaving, but rather bringing them in and then leaving this direct legacy through work that can continue here in its own right. And because there's real value in that, and as we see, work that begins here can end up in the capital city. It doesn't have to be the other way around. Too often the work begins there, people come here and then they leave. But yeah, it can start here and end somewhere else too.
All the hands go up. Simon.
Okay, Simon Fenley. I did one of those pilot projects, and I stayed on to help with project management. Gosh, there's lots of different voices here and different agendas, aren't there? And I don't think it's a case of switching track. I think it's a case of being more focused. And what we've done recently, we have formed partnerships with Aberystwyth Arts Centre and with Midland Arts Centre, and that gives a different shape to the residencies. And I think, perhaps if in a new iteration of the project, we could do the same. We could have one that is focused on the farming community and the farmers' union. We could have one that is specifically about conservation and rewilding. So I think that is learning, isn't it? That we don't want to lose that multiplicity of voices, because I find, Gareth is very. You say things that are very political, but you say them in such a way that I don't feel. So
that's what I'm trying to do, is my trick.
This point about the naming of places, I think is really important, because a place name gets changed, it seems like a casual thing, but you lose the whole backstory, don't you, when the name goes. So I think there's a huge, and then, as you pointed out this afternoon, when a valley gets flooded and the Welsh language community disappears, if that's in order to serve an English city, then it's a really difficult thing to swallow. So I think it is a good idea that we create a sequence of briefs that address different issues. I didn't think I'd hear myself saying that, but I think,
I agree. I wonder, again, I think it's like, what you're sort of saying is maybe institutional sort of, I suppose, fortitude to just kind of be a bit more radical and say, this is what we want to look at specifically, and we want to push this particular agenda. And I think that's then getting into political territory then, where you might just end up getting, I don't know what happens at that level, because I'm not working at that level, but I imagine there's lots of obstacles that would stop institutions from just being right, we're going to completely come out with, there's a climate crisis, and the institutions are afraid to maybe take a bolder step on it, maybe.
Can I come in there? I mean, we're just part of the Fluxus Arts London residency programme, where we partnered, Louise knows this, partnered with France. And Grisdale is involved as well, and there's Cove Park in Scotland, and there's somewhere in Ireland. And we've done one lot of residency, so this is really useful for me to hear everybody's feedback on how a residency works and what it can do. And in terms of that residency, they asked each organisation to come up with with a brief. And I know Elan Valley has, and it was up to the organisation how specific that brief was. And we have been actually very specific, and it is about climate change, and it is about the housing crisis, and it is about Ceredigion and the language and how they all interweave. So we're going through the selection process now, and it's really interesting. Even though you create a brief, you're still going to get loads of different voices, which is fantastic. But just to say that we have got lots of different voices within quite a closed brief as well. But I think it is good to focus, and then if you wanted to use that as action, as evidence for change, then who is it up to? Is it the organisation that does that? Is it the artist? How do you go about doing that?
There was Peter, Louise, Helen.
Peter Cox, introduced earlier as kind of fire marshal. I'm a playwright and screenwriter. I'm probably the longest resident artist in this community, because I've been doing community arts, theatre, youth theatre, professional theatre in this community for 30 odd years now. And there's an interesting connection with this residency and the beginning of these two buildings, these two CARAD arts and heritage buildings. So I just wanted to draw those threads together, because it includes Anthony as one of the previous artists who's been here. So in 1989 to 1991, farmer friends, neighbours, came to me knowing that I was a professional writer. I was writing for television as well. writing drama, they came to me and said, do you ever work with young people? And I said, yes, that's called youth theatre. Would you do a play with our young people, which is the Young Farmers Association in Wales? And I said, yes. And 2 years later, we produced a play called The Valley of Nghwm Elan, which was about the flooding of the valley. That play became a massive kind of transition point for this community. It used art in all its forms, so as theatre always does, it uses design, it uses narrative, it uses all of the aspects, audio, visual, everything, costume, all the design features of artistic activity that we take for granted. That play won its Radnisher round of the competition. I've never done competitive drama, it's not my world. It won the All Wales round of their competition. So that we were already 2 civic receptions in by that stage. And then this play went on and beat England, which was phenomenal for those kids locally. 290 odd productions in Wales, so it won all of them. Against 900 in England, it won against them. And the self-esteem and dignity that was born in that generation today still exists today, in that generation in 1991. Because they came back to me 2.5 to 3 years on, just pre-COVID, and asked, they were all the grown-ups who were in it, they were all now having their 16 to 20-year-old kids. And they asked, could we do that play again, with us running the process and us having our kids in that play, which Anthony came to see in Radar Leisure Centre, and which Anthony then moved on a piece of that work into one of his pieces that he presented as part of his residency. So there's a kind of longevity in that, but there's also a community development, there's a cultural development, there's a regional development, there's an economic development. Those kids have felt valued, they felt that they could get involved in civic engagement. So many layers and so many levels to do with it. But key to it was language. So my first observation was that in the same way that we've talked about climate, in the same way we talked about degrading landscapes, etc., the Radnisher dialect, which is an extraordinary, beautiful dialect of Wales, is always ignored. It's always forgotten. Most people don't think Radnisher is a county in Wales when you ask them. They always think it's near Rutland or something like that in England. And what I took as an important aspect of my writing as a playwright was to dig deep into the depths of history and the depths of actual use of that language, which is dying locally, that local dialect. And I then went on to write 4 other pieces, including film for BBC Wales as well. And so I just wanted to kind of grab together that we've got a kind of 30-year experience of this, which was then fed into some beautiful work that's come out of the residency. And I don't think they're disconnected. I think Anthony might want to say in his own words that you were profoundly affected by that community's voice. And that's hopefully what we're able to do to you today. We want to do you a good gig anyway. We want to share it with our friends who've come and have become friends and colleagues as artists. But also we're here representing the wider community, and it's important for us that we give it a voice as well.
Thank you very much, Peter. Yeah. Louise, you are next. Do you still want to?
So, for those who don't know me, I'm Louise Wright from the Arts Council of Wales. Don't boo, please. I think they mentioned many contexts today, but I think one of the important things is this is not what I wasn't going to say to begin with, but you know, the investment at the beginning helped for those pilots, and I think that really helped them to put Elan on the map as looking at it as a residency opportunity, and then it's grown from there with the Elan Links project. It feels like you're at a moment now where you can really look at what's been achieved and look at to support the legacy as well as create a very different residency model that is embedded here and that does support individuals that are working always in this community to have their voices heard alongside this. And I think that's really, that's really exciting and interesting. So it feels like there's some time that's needed to not slow down the process, but just to really look at that and see what that could become, what it might look like as a different type of residency. Really mindful that there isn't a hub here as in terms of provision for you know, a specific residency accommodation within Elan Valley. It's on almost like a temporary basis, from what I understand. So it's like understanding how all those different partners have to add into that. And I do agree. I think there are other partners that are around the table that could be there. You know, we talked about the National Farmers Union, and so it is like looking at what those partners could bring. I always think, you know, it's a challenge because we've always got to make the case for what value the arts bring to this. And we're doing some work around climate justice, and we've been working a lot in terms of consultation to look at what our strategy for climate justice will look like. So many people, I know you've been involved in maybe some of those discussions through the Future Wales Fellowship, which the Arts Council Wales and National Resources Wales have been partnered to deliver. So, you know, that's going to be central to quite a lot of our funding as well coming out in the next few years around, you know, our priority around climate justice. But also about access and about a diversity of lived experience of access to, you know, countryside, natural assets, and also how that factors in as well within this programme. And I think one of the things that really shocked me when we did the Future Wales Fellowship is that when that was announced, there was actually an outcry from, I think it was from an individual, and it was for the curlew actually. I think somebody who was doing some work with the curlew, like, the Arts Council is spending all this money on these artists, getting, you know, so much money to do this project, when that money could be spent on, you know, the actual work around the natural environment. And so we've still got to make that case, and I think some of the research and evaluation needs to help make that case as well.
Thank you very much. We are very slowly coming to the end, but we've got Heleth, Anthony here in the front, and then, I don't know your name, sorry.
Ed.
Yeah, Ed. So if we have those three, yeah, Heleth.
Very briefly, thank you for that. I think a couple of points. One is the time of change is here, and for me it's hugely exciting. It's a challenge, but collectively together, I think we can formulate plans and make a difference and be political. That was, I felt, having given the Future Wales Fellowship a huge responsibility as artists. I don't know what you feel, but Zyla, you were saying about that huge weight of responsibility, which I transferred into this adrenaline, which is energy. And so as a Future Wales Fellowship and looking at food resilience with respect to ecology, and you're talking about regeneration of the land, I think it's looking at our ancestors and the way they developed and they worked with nature, with respect to nature, and being present and witnessing now this huge change that we are currently in. It's not there, it's here now. And so that propelled me to be political and to take a piece of work which was sponsored by a member of the Assembly to the Senate, and that was a huge thing. And if anybody wants to talk about that, then I can, but it's very political. My work is currently political and spiritual. And secondly, I'm currently a project manager for co-design called Tir Canol. I don't know if anybody's heard of it, but it's a very good example of co-designing, partnering, of listening and working together with farmers, National Farmers Union, NRW. The role is sponsored by RSPB, so my working with curlews and respect for nature and ecology, I think artists, nature, ecology, sustainability, yeah, it's time now, and I think artists do have a power. Artists have always had power in engaging and having impact. Not power in a big sort of the traditional way, but intensity of purpose and meaning and depth and interpretation and that creative way of being and communicating is vital. So I'm glad that our residency is here.
Anthony and then Ed, and I think that's, yeah, Anthony.
Thanks. Yeah, my name's Anthony. I'm curator at the Sydney Urban Trust. I was really just, I think it's not I guess it's a further provocation, not really a question or answer, but I guess just what really struck me about what Mike said, and perhaps what I felt was sort of lost as we exited from that, was just like the urgency of what Mike was talking about. And I'm just really interested in how a residency program, which having been involved in lots of formats of those over the years, is fundamentally about giving artists really rich time and space to develop practice, to think how that kind of counteracts with the sort of absolute urgency. Like the time is now. I mean, quite quickly the time will be gone. So it's just absolutely so critical. Climate, biodiversity loss. Just how we balance the sort of time and space that artists need with the absolute urgency of now.
Final, Ed?
Oh yeah, hi. Well, that's nice to be at the end, is to say I think that this is...
Could you just briefly say who you are?
Such a great day. My name's Ed Jones. Thanks for today. It's been really great, especially being free. And the buffet, I think you should do this more often than every 6 years. Question for the panel. I'm here as I'm just beginning a new career within the arts. I'm working on Early Escapes, a book of artworks and accompanying poems, which I also animate into short films. The idea is to encourage environmentally regenerative tourism in Snowdonia. What advice would you have for me regarding potentially looking for a artist in residency, or have I got no hope, having only one award so far, and can I get a mentor?
Any advice on how to secure?
I think it's just keep applying for everything is my general advice. I think you have a strong idea, you know what you want to do, so I think you have to sort of find the residencies that's what they're looking for, and it sounds like perhaps that's the kind of residencies that are going to come up in the future. I don't really know what more to say other than that. Obviously you've got to keep working at what you're doing.
You don't need to have any awards to do a residency, no. By the way.
So. Do some research. There's some incredible examples now of how on Mull, introducing the seagull, they've had more ecotourism, more generation of income than the whole of the tourism in the summer tourism, and they want their tourism in the winter. It's transformed Mull. Look what's happened on Skye, look what's happening across Scotland now. There's been brilliant examples, just what they want to do in Snowdonia, of really thinking about a different type of tourism, ecotourism, regenerative agriculture, that sort of thing.
Scotland is next on the agenda.
But if you research, then you'll go into that project really more knowledgeable, and that help your practice, because there are examples of this working already. That's the upside.
Research is my matter.
Yeah, and if you want to email, I can point you some
mental.
I was just going to say thank you for that question. I'd probably say it's the most useful thing that's come out of the whole evening for me, only because it was very clear and direct, and it was asking for a request, which can be very hard to do, especially when you have very big statements on things, which we all do. I'm going to respond to that directly, but also generally to the discussion that just happened, to sort of maybe tie it a bit together in terms of what I'm thinking about. One is that we are at a very local residency here in terms of what it wanted to do. Not all residencies are like that. Not all residencies pay you. Most artists pay to go on a residency. So it's just a lot of I don't know how much experience you have about that. You said it was early career, so just saying that there's a whole breadth of things out there. I mean, it depends how much you might want to either invest into it or do it for free, or find spaces where you can volunteer and create your own residency, which happens all the time. So I think there's like a breadth of them. It's not like there is a system of residency. Plus, there's a lot of information out there around work that's international, that's everywhere. And I know young artists that I mentor who are like in Argentina on a paid residency, and they get it, and they're young, and I think, how the fuck did you get that?
Yeah,
so it happens.
Yeah,
so there's a bit of digging around, right? So I wouldn't probably be able to say, go here, go there, but you'll find those things. In terms of mentor, I'm sorry, but there is a lot of expertise in this room. You've heard it. Go up to people, ask them a question, find out who you want to talk to. Honestly, there is really good mentorship just here for any of us. You've got to chase those people and just follow up. So it's there. It's just literally right there. Just grab people, get their business cards. In terms of what you have just highlighted, which is something that's come up, which is how do you begin to connect the artists that come in on a residency with the artists that are already local? Although where you were talking about was not local, but it's a piece of work that I tried to do, as I exemplified in the presentation. I was really interested in what the kind of local knowledge was. At the same time, I would say I love the residency. It was perfect for what it was for me, and I really needed that. To me, the real elephant in the room is the fact that when I was here in 2018, the world and this country has fundamentally changed due to COVID, due to the advent of Black Lives Matter and the civil rights movement that has caused a total decolonization of the cultural production in the country, which is very, very important. And the highlight of the climate crisis, thanks to XR, which was there since the 70s, but suddenly we all went into whole panic mode, right? These are really important. That was not there in 2018 when I was here. All those topics, they were important to me, but now they keep me up at night. So it is a very different relationship. And I think that has been a journey that the residency itself has kind of interestingly had to hold. And in terms of examples, just to be kind of, proactive and productive, which is like my bag, I'm kind of like an obsessive project manager, is I did 2 different commissions for Historic England around monies that they were kind of injecting into revitalizing dying high streets. They really wanted socially engaged work, and in both of them, in very different ways, the model was really interesting because I came in, as usual, to places where I'm not from. I mean, I live in East London, but I don't work there. I'm always kind of working somewhere. That is not always an easy proposition. You're not always welcome. There is always tension of like, why the hell are you getting the money? Why aren't we getting the money? And and I have to tiptoe very carefully into those situations. I think I'm pretty good at it. And in both those projects, I worked with local artists in residence. And in one, we collaborated on a single piece. It was a local poet, and I created a public art trail. And we did our thing as part of a bigger thing. And in another piece in Gloucester, same thing, we kind of worked together and we created this big public event to take over on the streets of the council building. It was brilliant. But that artist also was developing a new group, and I'm really into like organizational development as a form of creative practice. And so I helped them constitution build and find funding and like develop that group. And I think one of the things to also think about is that, activism plays out in lots of different ways. And the way that the residency may impact might play out in lots of different ways as well. So, we might come here and see an exhibition and might talk about our work, but maybe it's just thinking about it as like when you throw a stone in a pond and it ripples, and you're seeing the splash, but like an awareness of the ripple is really important. And maybe it's some of the things that we might be able to collect in some sort of more reflective evaluation on work that happens. For example, last thing I'm going to say, is a piece of work I'm doing with the Institute of Art Innovation in Berlin around these meetups we do about every 8 weeks that look at artists working internationally around the link between social and planetary sustainability. Was that a huge thing on my radar pre-2018? I mean, maybe not. Did it help to be on this residency and understand land management? Yeah, 100%. And did that shift how I work? I get, now that I talk about it, whoever asked me that question, was it you? And I was like, did it shift my work? And now I can say, oh right, now that I can talk about it on this stage, I can say it did. So there is kind of various different, let's say, degrees or ways that we engage with a very important strand of activism in the work.
Thank you very much. I think that's a great point to finish up on. It's not the last of the day, though. We're just taking a break, and then there'll be more artists sharing their work later on, so I hope you can stay for that. And I just want to thank the artists here on stage, but also all of you in the room for contributing. I think there are lots of really productive, constructive ideas on the table, which I didn't kind of expect. So it's fantastic, and I hope we can take some of these forward, whether that be about community building, about rethinking residency models, how to support artists, and asking or challenging, kind of asking more difficult questions. So thank you all very much for your contribution. Diolch yn fawr iawn, and thank you.